Design in Fatih Sultan Mehmet Vakıf University, and he will talk about the usage of Adobe in Cyprus vernacular architecture. Buyurunuz hocam. Hocam sesiniz
İbrahim hocam sesiniz gelmiyor şu an. Görüntünüz de geç görünüyor ama. Görüntüye gördük.
Şimdi geliyor mu sesim?
Evet, şu an geliyor hocam.
Peki. Efendim her şeyden evvel beni davet ettiğiniz için çok teşekkür ederim böyle güzel bir toplantıya. Benden evvelki iki fevkalade teknik konudan sonra belki benim yapacağım bu konuşma kerpiç veyahut da taşın kültürle birlikte Kıbrıs, özellikle geleneksel Kıbrıs mimarisinde nasıl şekillendiği üzerine daha değişik bir sunum olacaktır. Dear participants, I would like to welcome and I would like to thank for the invitation of our organizers, and after this the two wonderful technical speeches, keynote speeches, my presentation will be on the use of Adobe in Cyprus vernacular architecture, but in a sense that how the vernacular, how in vernacular, urban and rural vernacular in Cyprus, the Adobe is combined with the culture, and how the vernacular architecture is shaped in due time in the centuries in Cyprus. So studies on the vernacular architecture bases on the impact of the functional relationship, contextual and environmental conditions such as climate, topography. As a matter of fact, building materials and methods of construction in general has a special role in these studies. On the other hand, it is accepted that on one hand, the precedence of the expression of form in architecture mainly be based on the availability of the materials and the constructional culture. Thus, besides the social cultural impacts of the heritage, the appropriate responses to the contextual necessities on the formation of the vernacular architecture can be noticeably identified. In the light of the identification, cultural heritage, and the continuity in the vernacular structures, the pedigree of the forms can be defined. Otherwise, the vagueness is unavoidable in the understanding of the vernacular architecture. Thus, only by referring to the early periods of the human civilization, the vernacular architecture can be interpreted or defined as anonymous. I would like to tell a little bit about the place and the background of the heritage of Cyprus for you. The intercontinental linkage, particularly, that is its strategical position in the crossroads of the vital sea routes, its historical existence in the center of the human civilization, emphasizes the uniqueness of the world cultural heritage. Starting from the Neolithic times, Cyprus have sequentially been occupied by Anatolian and Middle Eastern peoples, Assyrians, Hittites, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Persians, Macedonian Ptolemies, Romans, East Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Crusaders, Lusitanians, that means the Latins, Genoans, Venetians, Ottomans, and lastly British. Oof, what a diverse colonization on the island. Relatively small area and the less population density of the island have created a perfect arena for the cultural struggle and interchange between the invaders and the natives, though it is almost impossible to define who the natives were because of the frequent and repetitive occupations. But there is only one constant, and this constant are the physical, contextual aspects of the island. So, a little bit about the physical constants. In the Mediterranean region, which demonstrates the temperate zone, dominates 4 different seasons, though through the year, with moderate changes. In other respect, particular formation of the landscape of the island has an impact on the availability of the constructional materials. The local identity, on the other hand, of Cyprus can only be defined by searching the resemblance of the architectural formation in the close vicinity and the diffusion of the cultural heritage by the migration. So even from these 4 examples, we may see the resemblance of the Cypriot examples on the left-hand side, on top the urban and at the bottom the rural, and the examples of Anatolia on the right-hand side, on the up, and the Middle East examples on the lower. So that means the diffusion of the cultural heritage is very, very closely linked to the migration and the exchange of culture between the settlers on the vicinity around the island. So let's go a little bit to the rural and see, try to understand the rural development. So the island, if we have a cross section of the island, the environmental and climatic characteristics being the same, we come across the coastal strips, coastal highlands, inner highlands, and coastal central lowlands. Consequently, the formation of the architecture, depending on the availability of the materials, according to the heights and according to the mountains and the lower lands. So the settlement as well obey to this, and we see the nucleated, clustered, and compact identity in the settlements. Rural vernacular forms were developed according to the availability of the building materials and the climatic conditions. The organization mainly respond to the agrarian lifestyle. Religious and ethnical differences have minor effects on the formation of the rural forms and rural vernacular. The forms and shapes, sizes and dimensions, also locations and orientations of the units were mainly generated according to the contextual parameters of the region. The rural life went on largely on open and semi-open air in the island. In response to the climatic factors, the lifestyle, semi-open and semi-closed spaces were significant in the rural vernacular architecture. So the spaces and uses to see how they are organized, we come across an organic and pragmatic house type. So the climatic, environmental, socio-economical and cultural aspects have governed the formation. Both the rural and urban vernacular houses of the island consist of, again, according to the climatic conditions, open and semi-open, allowing flexibility and use as the need. So the need for shelter is vital against the mild but rainy conditions in the winter time, and also against the extreme heat in summer. So the angular differences of the sun rays between the summer and the winter governs especially the formation of the arcade or the hole opening to the south. It is essential in Cypriot architecture, and especially in rural architecture, to open the house to the south direction, so that to have the differences in summer and winter sunshine to penetrate to the inner or outer surface of the hole. Contrary to the Adobe construction used in the main body of the house, the frame, intrados, and columns of the arcade are built in stone masonry. So despite the fact that the outer walls are of Adobe, formation of the subspaces are brought out in the main living space by using masonry arches and columns and beams in the midpoints of the space, so that they may organize the rafters above these arches and above the post and beams on the horizontal position. Outer arcades and vaulted inner walls consisting the living spaces also act as the components joining the rooms aside or behind the colonnaded arcade or colonnaded hall. Bathrooms built by Adobe mostly encountered the Turkish houses, mainly placed in a corner of the courtyard closer to the living units. And the cooking activity can take place on another corner of the courtyard or hall. The most important part of the hearth were generally located in the courtyard, not brought in the house. So it is very essential that the heat confinement property of Adobe as a material is utilized in constructing both the domed bathrooms and the family halls, so that the heated space inside is kept for long periods after being heated. Of course, the secondary functions like domestic animals, the shelter was built by stone or by Adobe at the backyard. And if we are going to see the typology, the rural vernacular architecture of the island, fundamentally, the whole is the major determinant of the identification of the classification of house plant type. And primarily, it is evaluated into three groups: the single unit without hall, as on the left-hand side, those with outer hall in the middle, and those with the inner hall in the right-hand side. So the general forms have been developed accordingly, especially the use of Adobe is encountered in the building of this. Beside these three main groups, we see a single unit above a masonry archway as a deviation from the main typology. Universal traditional ways of production of and use of Adobe construction adopted also in Cyprus as well. There is no need for me to explain because of the very wonderful explanation of the previous two presentation. It's the similar way of producing the Adobe and the similar way of constructing the Adobe walls. But the arches leading to the inner halls, mostly constructed by cut stone masonry, and the use of timber as is prevalent in constructing the stairs, as you may see, bottom middle, beams as is on the right, lintels in combination with the Adobe and the stone. So how the units are growing generally in the flat topography, the repetition of the units can be seen, or the combination of the units, one arch, one single unit, or a few arches coming together, and so on. Professor Jurek, who was my PhD student, have studied these in his PhD and in his master's thesis thoroughly. So I am happy to adopt some information from him in this presentation. So in the strip topography, then the placement of the arched and the single units without arch have different types of placement. So if you come to the urban areas, the impact of the actors, activities, architectural components, and cultural landscape elements in Cyprus generate the urban forms through the centuries. And as in this picture, showing the street pattern, architectural identity, demographic composition of Nicosia in the early British era of just right after the Ottoman period. We may come across the continuation of the street patterns and continuation of the Ottoman forms with the jumba, the projected jetties of the houses, and as well the mixture of the Ottoman subjects without making any differentiation between the Turkish, Greek, or Jewish Cypriots or the newly generated British subjects. So this is the mixture of the population, the demographic composition adapted itself to the expression of the era that they are living in. So let's have a very quick brief in the impact of different ruling periods in urban context from recent to early history. So the recent as possible, we come across the British period starting from 1878, where they rent the island from the Ottomans and they convert the island as the British colony in 1914 after the First World War, and then their era has continued up to 1960. So in this period, we encountered the grounds for modernity. They brought the modern functions and modern constructional techniques in their time. And we see the British colonial styles and British colonial forms. But also both in the urban areas, but especially in the rural areas, the Adobe constructional systems continue as sustainable elements, and but they take the form, they change the form of their vernacular understanding into the British colonial formation. So this era, we may say that the vernacular architecture losing its power laid path to flourish the modern vernacular. But Ottoman period which is one of the longest period in the island, from 1571 to 1878, actually 1940 up to. In general, partially sharing the same roots, the Ottoman building tradition was not in contrast with the Cypriot architecture. The colonnaded semi-open and mid-A1 plan types have also used in both the main urban and rural organization of the Turkish house. And in this period, we see that some new Adobe techniques are brought to the island, like the Himish architecture from Anatolia. So, furthermore, the Ottoman contribution appears to be an impact on the improvement of the spatial organization of the Adobe houses. But when we go back a little bit, the short but most destructive period is the period of the Genoese and the Venetian period, where to concentrate on the Renaissance characteristic, they knocked down almost all the previous remains. The remains of course, the Lusinian period, where again one of the other longest periods in the architecturally in the island, from 1192 to 1489. So the Latin Knights of the island built the fabulous examples of the Gothic architectural style. But unfortunately, because of the Venetian time, on behalf of building Renaissance city, almost nothing can be traced that influenced the urban vernacular in this from this period. But some examples of the arched gateways to some mansions. Gothic architecture reflected not only on the fabulous cathedrals, but assumably on the single houses of the urban vernacular architecture. So Middle East influences, give and take between the Arab lands and the vicinity, Lebanon and Syria, beside the Tarma, A1, and colonnaded frontal opening to the garden, frontal halls opening to the garden. We encounter both in Cyprus and in the vicinity Arab lands as well. So that we may say that there's a give and take in the house typology, and of course the method of construction of Adobe as the main material. So if you go a little bit earlier in the history, the urban Roman houses are the followers of the typical atrium and central courtyard houses. And the antiquity period, to our opinion, the answer to the question of the origin of the Cypriot vernacular lays in the human and cultural interaction in the Mediterranean basin in this period. In fact, This period exhibits alternative preliminary schemes for almost all houses types used in the rural Cypriot architecture, including the round houses of Kalavasos to the Neolithic open courtyard, inner courtyard houses. So again, in this period, the house typologies strikingly resemble the house types and schematically consist the closest typical relationship with houses generated in Anatolia, where spread in the or which is spread in the southeastern mainland direction. That is the Hilani of type of Hittites, and we may say that there is a give and take even during the Hittite times. So let's go back to the urban settlement. We may take in the Nicosia as the rounded star-shaped walled city of the Renaissance time, built by the Venetians. Luckily, let's say, they cannot have enough time to complete the city plan as a star-shaped inner structure. The structure of the roads exhibit the medieval characteristics of the pre-Renaissance Lusignan period. And finally, historic Nicosia, after the Ottomans, become a typical Ottoman city embedded within a star-shaped post-medieval Renaissance walled city, prevailing the vernacular urban house forms. So during the Ottoman time, on top of the Latin Crusaders' urban texture of Nicosia, which was destructed by the Venetians, many places have been transferred by or for Ottoman inhabitants into the mere accommodation settings, converting the spirit of the pre-Renaissance medieval spirit to the Ottoman taste. This attempt regulates the transformation of the old town in accordance with the Ottoman tastes, values, and practices. Through the common urban vernacular forms prevailing, the typical frame infilled by Adobe, the mesh constructional technique of Ottomans, seem to be used to build up on top of the remaining of the Latin ruins, as you may see it here. So, unfortunately, we don't have a proper Latin Lusignan house, urban vernacular house in our hand due to the destruction done by the Venetians in those times. But on top of the remains, the Ottomans have built and complete the forms according to the Ottoman style. The urban vernacular during the Ottoman period reflects the typical tastes, approaches, and forms bearing the resemblance to the main inland Anatolia, which brought alongside the materials and method of constructions to the island. While reflecting the sustainable typology generating elements such as arcades and inner halls of the rural vernacular, in conjunction with the Ottoman architecture, the use of Adobe as a material and methods of construction in different forms was applied in the Ottoman rural or urban and rural vernacular. Synthesis of different building techniques such as load-bearing Adobe walls on stone footing, wooden frame infilled by Adobe Gumush gave birth to the house form, which would be prototype for the Ottoman and the following periods as urban houses. Use of gypsum plasters in combination with bare yellow sandstone masonry and whitewashed surfaces, wooden frame projections, jutting oriels or the jumba creates the general urban vernacular architectural expression. As you may see on the left-hand picture, it is the continuation of the typical Anatolian framed infilled by either stone or by Adobe type of construction in Cyprus as well. So Ottoman understanding of functional spatial transition between public and private demonstrate the indoor-outdoor spaces and open-close entities were adapted to the urban vernacular. Decorative indentations, candle and utensil niches, wardrobes could easily be embedded inside the thick Adobe walls, while opening upper stained glass windows. The suspended ceilings provide a highly decorative interiors. The width provided again by the thick Adobe walls permits the placements of the pillow to sit and observe outside by the family members. As a result of cultural change and due to the colonial modernization effects of the British period, new interpretations such as inner arcaded hall or hayat, as in Turkish, being transferred to outside, to the street side as a balcony. So this is a new approach in the urban vernacular due to the change, cultural change in the British time. Jumba, the jetting, gradually left its form and function and changed into balcony. As you may see in this picture, the gradual change from the depth to the front as the projection. The jumba itself, the opening balcony with the roof on it and the regular balcony of the modern types. So, in due time, architects took over, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Professor Ibrahim, for this interesting journey to the traditional residential architecture in Cyprus throughout the successive building, historic periods, and showing how Adobe as a local building material was used in every period